This is Marketing Careers Uncovered, and I'm Dave Hayward. Is there such a thing as luck? Look back at most success stories, and you'll most likely hear accounts of serendipitous encounters and moments of chance that ultimately snowball and transform into something really special. Kathryn Strachan joins us today to share some of her story and learnings along the way. Today, she has a hard-won reputation as one of the sharpest minds in marketing, but it wasn't always that way. As we go today, you can expect to hear a lot about how she thinks strategically, resilience, knowing when to take risks, and again, some of those hard-won lessons along the way. Kathryn, why don't you give us a little intro and background to yourself before we dive in?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here and to speak with you guys. So I am Kathryn Strachan. I've been in marketing for the last decade, ran a very successful content marketing agency called CopyHouse, which I scaled from just myself to 32 people with over 2 million turnover before I sold and exited it. So I exited in August, and now I am taking some time for myself, but I am working as a fractional CMO to help companies define their marketing strategies. I have a book called Scaling Success: How to Build Brands That Break Barriers that was just awarded international bestseller in the US and the UK last week. And I also have my own podcast called Marketers Unleashed, which you can listen to on Spotify. So I have a little bit of a portfolio career at the moment, which I really enjoy. And yeah, I'm doing a lot of traveling and enjoying just not having to work all of the time.
So quite a few strings to your bow there. Any particular elements you're enjoying most at the moment right now?
Yeah, I mean, the book and the podcast are my passion projects for sure. They're not necessarily monetized yet, so I'm enjoying it. I do them because I enjoy them and I get a lot of energy from them. So I would say promoting my book and promoting my podcast and doing everything that goes into running a podcast are my two passion projects at the moment.
Very good. And now let's go back to the very beginning. When did marketing really start for you? Was there a particular point in time? Was it something you always fancy doing? If you can take us back to those earliest moments, so just paint a little picture as to what were you up to and how you ultimately started to break into this world.
Yeah, so I have 2 degrees in English literature, which I don't know how useful they are, but I really love words, and I've always loved my words my whole entire life. I was a kid who knew where the public library was because that's where I spent all my summers. I wrote books for my dad as a little kid, and then when I grew up, went to university, did an undergraduate in English lit, and then I went to UCL and did a master's in it. So I always really loved words. But when I moved to the UK, obviously not from here, if you can't tell by my voice, I wasn't allowed to work. So I worked as a dog walker, cash in hand, on the streets of London, walking rich people's dogs. And one of my very first clients was the vice president of marketing for Yelp. So I would watch her dog when she was traveling and working. And after about 2 years of walking her dog and staying in her very nice flat in Old Street when she was away on business to dog sit, she invited me to come into the office as a marketing executive and to support the marketing team. And that's the first time that I saw copywriting as a role. I didn't even know what a copywriter was before then. So I saw the copywriter role and I was like, wow, that's really cool. I want to do that when I grow up. So after I graduated from my master's, I pursued a career in copywriting. So CopyHouse, as you can probably tell by the name, was a content marketing agency. So it was all about copywriting. It was all about words. So that followed the passion for literature, for words, for writing into a business. I mean, I stopped writing content for clients because we had a big team. The team were just doing all of that. I discovered that I'm very good at business. I'm very good at strategy. I don't know that I was ever really super great at being a copywriter, but I'm much better at being a business leader and setting strategies and thinking strategically and seeing the big picture because I can see opportunities where other people perhaps cannot. And I'm really good at connecting the dots and figuring out what everything means and reading between the lines. So my career kind of grew in that direction. It's probably been 4 years since I've written anything for a client now. But I was able to draw on those skills when I wrote my book. So I was able to use my copywriting skills from my very early career to write a book and to tell everybody my story around raising brand awareness and what you need to think about when you're creating a marketing strategy. But I guess it all started with somebody taking a chance on me, and it all started with dog walking, which is a funny way to get into marketing.
There's an element here in which you also have to, yes, they took a chance on you, but you also have to put yourself out there, right? There was, it's no accident that you discover that she works in a marketing space, that being invited in, you showing and taking an interest. If you'd have just sat back and waited for things to happen, or just to get lucky, would you have had that foot in the door? Possibly not.
No, probably not. I mean, I'm very good at putting myself out there because I always think, like, what's the worst that's going to happen? You ask that person for a coffee, or, you knock on that door, and, what's the worst that's going to happen? They're maybe going to say no. But then you're no worse off than you are now. So like when I really started to pursue the copywriting career, I reached out to a bunch of people. I sent them emails. I said, "Are you free for a coffee?" I was just trying to learn as much as I possibly could about what that role was, how I could get into it. And that's how I, found my first position working as a copywriter. If you don't put yourself out there, you're not going to gain anything. And what's the worst that's going to happen if you ask somebody for a coffee, or you ask for an internship, or, you ask to be involved in something? They might say no. They might just not respond, or, they might say yes, but you're not going to be with either one of those three. You're not going to be worse off than you are right now. Nobody's going to be mad at you for asking for a coffee or for asking for an opportunity. You're not going to get yelled at or shouted at or publicly embarrassed. I mean, none of those things are going to happen. All that's going to happen is they might say, "No, I don't have an opportunity right now," or "I'm too busy, I don't have time," or not respond at all. And, really it's no skin off your nose if any of those happen. You're going to be totally fine. That person's probably not even going to remember in a month or so. So, I mean, I think people are often too scared to like put themselves out there. But I always think, what's the worst that's going to happen? And if you want something, you've got to ask for it.
Yeah, and I've always found myself quite pleasantly surprised as well how often people will say yes or want to be helpful. I'd say it's probably in the minority of people who outright said no, don't have time, or completely ignored me. We tend to have this view that actually it's the minority will say yes, whereas actually people for the most part, I mean, assholes are everywhere. Most people want to be helpful and help others and be helped in return, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's true because a lot of people remember when they were in their early career, and they asked somebody for a coffee and that person said yes. So, I mean, a lot of us will turn around. I mean, I see it as my duty to turn around and help the people who are coming up behind me. And I think a lot of business and senior leaders think the same.
And another piece which I'm quite interested to dive into as well is, so you did English literature degrees, a lot of academic work there. In terms of when you actually went into becoming a copywriter in a business and doing this as a trade, what pieces of your English literature degree did you find helpful, and what things did you have to learn on top to become a really good copywriter?
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to copywriting. So you're like when you do an English lit degree, you have to be really good at looking at all the research, everything that's out there, and creating a hypothesis. So creating a story based on other stories, basically. So, you might be doing interviews or desk research of other academic papers and then pulling them all together to create an argument. And I mean, content is basically does a similar thing. I mean, you have to often either do desk research or interview a subject matter expert, or do something like this to create the piece of content. A piece of content is not just born from your mind, the way that a piece of fiction might be. So you still have to do all that research. That research process is the same. Creating an outline is the same. Creating outlines was something that we implemented across the agency. So copywriters always had to create an outline. The client had to approve the outline before we actually did the final creation, and it reduced the need for amends and revisions and things like this because it got everybody on the same page. So, we use that process in the agency as well. And then, being able to write and draft a coherent argument is all part of being a literature student. I think the thing that's different is a deeper understanding of the audience. So, the content that you create needs to be more conversational. It might still be on a technical subject matter. So my agency specialized more on complex industries. So did a lot of work across financial services, insurance, technology. But, the main USP was our ability to take this complex information and deliver it to the audience in a way that the audience can understand. When you're writing in academia, you're not necessarily thinking about an audience. You're thinking more about like the piece of content itself and its argument and whether or not, the evidence you have supports a hypothesis, rather than, making sure that it really communicated and cut through to speak to a specific audience that, you may not actually have anything in common with. A lot of our content that we created at the agency was geared at CTOs, CFOs. I've never been a CFO in my whole entire life and never will be. But in marketing, still need to speak to that audience, especially for financial services or fintech brands. That's a common profile for them. So knowing how to speak to these audiences and knowing what kind of information and content they wanted and needed and what would work and cut through the noise for them. So, marketing kind of has more of an external perspective.
It's interesting how there's so much that is not copywriting that goes on before you've even put any words to page, really, isn't there? It's all those classic marketing techniques of know your audience, understand how you might need to position yourself, what kind of message will cut through.
So you need a marketing strategy before you can create content. So these days I work as a fractional CMO and I help companies to define that marketing strategy. But when I was at the agency, I was doing a lot of the new business. I was doing a lot of the sales. So I was having all these conversations with prospects, and I would quite often ask them, do you have a marketing strategy? And they would say, no, we don't, but we want to raise brand awareness. And, that's kind of where the fractional work started to become, because, I was like, well, I can help you create this marketing strategy. Let me help you create it, and then we'll get it into production for you. So I saw a real need in the market for the ability to create marketing strategies for these types of companies so that they can then work with copywriters and content agencies to produce the content. So, a lot of companies will often try to do execution first. They'll try to do PR or social or copy before they have a marketing strategy, and they're almost always unhappy with the results. So normally when I get involved with a client these days, they will have tried to work with a PR agency or hired a junior marketing executive. They will have tried to do the execution before they had a strategy. And they will always, say that that agency didn't achieve results, or the very junior marketing person that they hired didn't deliver what they thought that they would deliver. And of course they didn't, and it wasn't their fault. If you don't have a larger marketing strategy, then you have no idea what kind of agency you need or what you need that agency to do. If you also hire a very junior person without a marketing plan in place, and they have no direction, they have no one to support them or guide them or lead them. So, it's not surprising that these things don't work, but quite often it seems to me that brands need to, fall on their face 2 to 3 times before they really learn the value of strategy.
And it's amazing to me how many businesses are still somewhat winging it. And I think there's a real opportunity. So even if you are a more junior marketer working in a business and you're being tasked with writing content or producing things for social media, actually pushing back and asking the question of, well, how does this relate to our strategy? Do we have a strategy in place? Do we need to create one before we start going in? I think sometimes, particularly, I felt this early on in my career, where you feel this overwhelming obligation to jump right in and start doing stuff and being seen as somebody who can get things done and moving. And sure, there is value in that, but if you go off, without a clear sense of direction, then you just end up being blown around in the wind, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to learn how to say no. So when you're in the beginning of your career, you're really keen to please, and that comes from almost a sense of insecurity. You feel like you don't know enough to say yes or no. You really question your self-worth. But as you get more experience and you get more confident in your marketing skills and in your knowledge and know-how, you start to say no more and more often. And I think between it depends and no, those are the two most common things I say in my day-to-day, is either it depends on X, Y, and Z, or no, you probably shouldn't do that.
My favourite word of the decade is why at the moment. Why do we want to do this? Why this and not that? When you give that piece of feedback, why, and you constantly digging and looking for the ultimate goal, and what does good look like? So then, if somebody does turn around and say, "Well, do you know what? Yeah, we ran this program of activity. It didn't quite reach objectives." At least we knew what the damn objectives were from the start, as opposed to looking back and going, "Well, that didn't work." And well, define work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and why didn't it work? There'll be a lot of reasons why it didn't work.
Yeah. It could be poor product. It could be wrong audience segment. Poor
Lack of
poor
budget.
messaging. It very rarely is solely down to the promotional material that was pushed out. Although it's a tempting target for business when things don't go to plan. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about your experience building and scaling your content marketing agency. So you went to, it was around 30 odd people, 2 million turnover. What are the biggest challenges you've faced on that journey? Are there any key moments that you still recall to this day that really shaped how you led the business? What is it like being in the driving seat?
Yeah, I mean, so I set up the agency in January 2020, which is a fantastic time to launch a business. And 3 months later, the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, we were a team of 4 at that time, and I didn't want to furlough anybody or make anybody redundant. So what I did instead was I looked really hard at what we did and what we did well. And that was really when we started to define ourselves as a content marketing agency for technology companies. Before that, we had worked across travel, recruitment, we had worked across so many industries, and we didn't have a clear proposition. We didn't have clear positioning. And that, we lost a lot of those travel and recruitment clients during the first couple of weeks of the pandemic. We didn't have contracts in place because we were new and I was stupid. So, we needed to sit down. We needed to think about how we were going to pivot and how we are going to cut through that noise. And that proposition that we came out with at the time was quite innovative because there wasn't a lot of other agencies doing that. I mean, there was then a really big boom in the tech sector. So a lot more agencies now are, but at the time they weren't. So that really allowed us to accelerate. We then got the bounce back loan, and we invested the bounce back loan into our marketing. So, our marketing manager was like our 5th hire, which is a really early for agencies as well as product companies to bring on and invest heavily in marketing from such an early stage. But that really allowed us to skyrocket out of the pandemic and, really capitalize on that growth that then came from the tech sector and the tech industry. So, I mean, there was lots of like really critical and pivotal moments throughout that. I talk a lot about this in my book because the book like follows the trajectory of CopyHouse and like how I built brand awareness, both for us as an agency, but also for clients. So it's packed full of like actionable advice and then peppered with personal stories of things that we did right and things that we did wrong throughout that period. But yeah, I mean, I would say that that was a pretty critical moment in our growth.
How did you, on a slightly more practical level, when you're saying you refocused your proposition there? How did you go about that? Was that talking to prospective clients? Did you identify that as a particular growth area? Were you all sat in a room together? How does that sort of stuff work? Because we can look at it with the benefit of hindsight and go, well, gee, I just reshaped my proposition and the business flew. But you're having to make some calculated bets here, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, so we ran a workshop, the same workshop that I now run with my fractional clients. We ran as a company, and to help us define who it was we really wanted to work with. What did that look like? What was our how, our why, our mission, our vision, all of that core messaging that we always did as an agency, and I now do for my fractional clients. So we started there. We also looked at the market. We looked at the market and saw, okay, well, who's doing well right now? Who's predicted to do well? Where do we see an opportunity? Where are there gaps in the market? So we looked at what other agencies were doing. And like I said, at the time, there weren't a lot of agencies that specialized on the tech sector. There is definitely more now, but a lot of those have either pivoted since or are relatively new agencies. So at the time, there wasn't anybody. And I also thought about what we could do well that other people couldn't. So because I have 2 degrees in academia, we were always doing more complex content. We were always doing, the more difficult stuff and the stuff that like isn't sexy that a lot of agencies don't want to work on. They want to work on food and drink and travel because they're way sexier than blockchain and Web3 and, all the stuff that we were working on and in. So it was a bit of internal reflection, a bit of thinking about what we did well, and workshopping ourselves, and then external reflection on where were there gaps in the market, where could I see opportunities, and, where was there demand? So, I mean, it was kind of a bit of both. And I think any good strategy requires internal as well as external. And from that, we then formed our proposition statement, which, served us well throughout that 5-year period.
And how different is it from right at the beginning where, there's 3 or 4 people in the team to where you got to with 30? Was life fundamentally quite different at either end of the spectrum?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I moved increasingly out of copy, obviously. So, stopped doing any of the writing myself. I even stopped overseeing the copywriters because we had a creative director. So, you as one person cannot manage 32 people. I think probably the max that one person can manage is about 5 to 7. You can't really manage more than that. So you have to create a company hierarchy. You have to create structure within that company, and, create teams and departments and like all of these things. And while everybody has to work together, you become increasingly more focused on like the company strategy and the company vision, because as a company leader, you're really the only person who can look after that. So my role went from being a copywriter to being a business leader, being responsible for defining the company vision and, working with senior leaders from each of the departments to help them define their visions for the company departments, overlooking, getting a lot involved in finances, owning the P&L. I mean, we had a business developer, but I did a lot of business development. It's where a lot of my speaking came out of, and a lot of my personal brand was used to fuel the agency as well. I now have 18,000 followers, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I had to kind of put myself out there as a figurehead and a profile, had to be at a lot of networking events. I was like kind of expected to be out and about and at these events to show face, meet with clients. Like, my role had very little actually to do with copywriting by the end of it, which is why now it's a bit funny sometimes, because occasionally I'll meet a fractional client who's like, who will expect me to write their blogs. And I'm like, I have not written a blog in like 6 years. I do not know how to do that anymore. Like, I can create you the best strategy in the world, but I have no idea how to write a blog anymore. So like, definitely barking up the wrong tree.
You got to be really consistent with this stuff as well, haven't you? There's no sense in going out and speaking at 6 events at the start of the year and then complete radio silence for the rest of the year. You end up on quite a bit of a treadmill, don't you? As well as the collective responsibility that, when there are 30 people with livelihoods and mortgages and everything else that goes on with life, and the success or failure of the business. Whilst you're not directly managing people, you're feeling quite a sense of responsibility, aren't you, across the whole piece of this thing that you built?
I mean, in the payroll every single month is very high when you have 32 people, so it can be a little bit scary sometimes.
It can always look very sexy from the outside, looking in. But spoken to so many different business owners on here, and the one thing that is constant is that sheer weight of responsibility. That if this all goes pear-shaped, it's not just me sleeping in my car for a few months. There's a much wider impact there.
Yeah, I mean, and the people not only rely on you, but they have chosen to believe in you, because I mean, they could work anywhere else, but they've chosen to believe in you and what you're building. So you are responsible for them, and they have families and mortgages and bills, and you carry all of that weight. So I mean, I ended up massively burning out. By the time I exited, I was probably a 12 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of burnout. My marriage almost collapsed, came very close to collapsing. It took 1.5 years of therapy to put it back on track. I didn't sleep for 2 years. I'd wake up every single night at like 2 a.m. and be awake from like 2 to 3 and, 4, 5. And, needed to sleep in till 9 or 10 pretty much every day just to be able to function. I had a perpetual eye twitch that did not go away for 6 months. And, I was not okay in the slightest. My daughter's 7, and I missed a lot of her 3 to 5-year-old years. I didn't walk her to school for 2 years because I was too busy with work. So, I mean, I paid a massive personal price as well. I mean, I'm recovering now. I'm probably 7 on the scale. I've still got a way to go. I'm still not fully recovered. I'm having to be really careful on how much I work and where I invest my time and my energy. And, I'm focused a lot on family and my daughter, and I do most of the school runs now, which is nice. And yeah, spending a lot more time with her and, at home and traveling and like following my own passions. But I've really had to take a step back. I mean, it's been 6 months and I'm still not fully recovered from burnout. I mean, I think it might probably be another 6 months before I feel ready to like take on a big challenge again. So, I mean, not paying attention to your health and your mental health can have a massive, massive impact on you.
But the number's coming down. We're heading in the right direction, aren't we?
My eye twitch is gone, and spent the last 1.5 years in marriage therapy. My marriage is in a really good place now, but it took a lot of work to get it back on track. So, I mean, yeah, things are definitely like better for me. I'm a lot happier, and even like people who I maybe don't have like who don't know all the details. So like my parents, for example, like I love them to bits, but like I don't share all the details of my life with them, and even they have been like, wow, you seem a lot happier. Like, yep. So even people who like don't know all the details of my life or my work, have noticed a massive shift on me. One of my friends who I hadn't spoken to her in a few months, and I caught up with her recently, and she's like, your voice has like dropped a whole octave. You're like totally relaxed now. I'm like, Yeah, it's true. I'm definitely not stressed, and my anxiety's under control, and I'm able to go to the gym way more often and make time for myself.
Well, was it that burnout in particular that was the catalyst for you to sell, or was there another driving force there?
Yeah, I mean, it was burnout and my marriage collapsing. I mean, it's in a much better place now, but it was on the brink of divorce. Because of how much I was working, and how distant that then made our relationship. So while my husband is probably one of the most supportive people on the whole entire planet, even he has a limit for what he can take and how much absence he can take. So yeah, I mean, I had a choice to make, and it's not an easy choice, but there are, I think about life as you're juggling many balls. Some of those balls are made out of glass, some of them are made out of rubber. So you can drop some of them, but if you drop other ones, you're never going to be able to pick it up again. And your relationships with your friends and your family and your life partner are the glass ones. Your health is also a glass ball, and if you drop that, you're never going to get it back.
How do you sell a content marketing agency? Do you decide, okay, I'm ready to sell this thing. Who wants to buy?
We for a long time worked with an advisor who was our Ned, who also specialized in M&A. So when it came time, and when I really needed to get out, I spoke to them about who they knew. So they know a lot of people on both sides. They know people who are actively looking to buy, and people who are actively looking to sell. And part of what their company does is bring these two parties together. So they connected us with the group that bought CopyHouse. And yeah, then there was it was about a year in the making probably. So I knew, it was big news to like everybody in the market. Because you don't really talk about these things when you're going through the whole process. But I knew probably about a year before. So that's why I started being a fractional CMO, because I knew that the exit was coming. So yeah, I mean, it's a long process. There's a lot of paperwork and due diligence and all sorts of crap. Not very interesting crap either.
And it appears to the outside world that you woke up one morning, decided to sell the business, and handed it over to someone, and that's that. But there's that, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's just so much, isn't there? Yeah, everyone's got about 50 million questions about a particular corner of your business, and not only have you got to provide the answers, you've got to find out those answers quite swiftly as well, haven't you?
Yeah, and stuff that you haven't even documented needs to be documented. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot that goes into it. So, I mean, I think it took the market quite by surprise, because a lot of people know me, a lot of people knew the company, but it really was not a surprise in the slightest to me. And I did not wake up one day and go, I'm done.
When you moved to the UK, initially, you mentioned you were doing dog walking and various bits and pieces. You weren't able to work straight away, and then started to build your career pretty much from scratch. I guess one of the questions I've got, and it comes under this whole resilience piece. What kept you motivated and going in those early days?
Well, I moved to the UK for my husband. So I met him on a beach in Ghana. I was studying abroad as part of my undergraduate in Ghana, and he was volunteering, and we met on a beach and had 5 days together. And he said to me at the end of those 5 days that if I came to UK, he'd wait for me. So like 3 months later, when I was done with my program, I did. And yeah, I mean, it was really hard at first because I wasn't allowed to work. I mean, we ended up getting married very early on, like a year and a half into our relationship, because it got to the point where it was like, so do you want to break up or get married? Because I don't have any visa options left. And we were quite young. I mean, we were in our early 20s. So we decided that, well, what the hell, we get married and we get divorced 10 years later. Like, that would suck, but it wouldn't be that big of a deal to be divorced in your early 30s. That's not that big of a problem. So we decided to go for it. I mean, I think I've always had a growth mindset though, because my dad is an entrepreneur. So my whole entire life, my dad has force fed me business books. He used to make us watch The Secret on long car trips to upstate New York to see my mom's parents. And The Secret, for anybody who doesn't know, is all about positive manifestation and how you can create anything in your life. All you have to do is believe in it and it will be true. So my dad force fed us self-help and business books since I could basically walk. I've seen him take so many risks in business. He has done everything from hover lawnmowers to timeshare to most recent was in the cannabis industry. It's totally legal in Maine, which is where he lives and where I'm from. So, I mean, I've seen him do everything, take so many big bets, some of which have paid off, some of which have definitely not paid off. And I grew up in that household. So I'm one of three, and two of us own our own businesses. But we're all high achievers. My brother was a professional snowboarder. My sister is a doctor. Like, we all have aimed and gone really big. And I think a lot of that is due to our growth mindset and our ability to believe that anything is possible, and all you have to do is try.
When things go well, it's brilliant, and you can ride that crest all day long. It's actually how you deal with things when they don't quite go to plan, where you need to dust yourself off and go, okay, that didn't work. What do I take into the next thing that I do? It's managing the lows as well as the highs, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of lows in business for sure. And I mean, in agency world, you can have highs and lows in the exact same day. But I guess what comes alongside that growth mindset is not quitting. So, I mean, going hard and, continuing to push through and continuing to persevere. So, I mean, we're all pretty resilient, but I mean, resilience is part of that growth mindset because, you're not going to get everything right first out of the gate. I mean, nobody does. The first time you learn anything, you're going to be bad at it. The first time that a kid learns how to walk, they fall down. You can't learn how to walk if you don't fall down first. So, I mean, it's all part of that same mindset. And I mean, there's definitely been a lot of, setbacks and turbulence, but I don't give up very easily. I am there's a great saying that allow yourself 5 minutes to cry and fall apart, and then put your boss girl face on and go get it. So I mean, even when life has been a little tearful, I don't stay sad for long, and go back and go after it, and bounce back. But yeah, I mean, growing up in a household that was very up and down because there was a lot of wins and a lot of losses as well, you learn how to ride that wave. And I've been riding that wave my whole entire life, pretty much, because my dad was running these businesses since before I was born. So we grew up in that chaotic, up and down entrepreneurial life.
You have the opportunity now to see other people coming up in the industry, entering and developing. What's the biggest mistake that you see people make when they're trying to grow a career?
I think a lot of people are scared to go get it, or scared to reach out or ask for coffee. I've built pretty much all of my career through reaching out and asking people for coffees, or, putting myself out there, or, if I'm unhappy with a situation, changing it. So I never really understand these people who talk about wanting something or talk about not being happy with something and don't do anything about it. My husband and I actually have a term for it. We call it Japan syndrome, because we used to have this friend who for 5 years talked about how much he loved Japan, how much he wanted to go there. He even got tattoos on his arm about Japan. He was absolutely fascinated with the culture, and he talked about it every time we'd see him, which was maybe twice a month. He would be talking about how much he wanted to go there, and he never went, ever. And I mean,
Magic.
yeah. But a lot of people do this. Like, it might not be Japan. It might be, I hate my job. I hate my job. I hate my job. I hate my job. And they don't do anything about it. Or, I'm unhappy in my marriage. I'm unhappy in my marriage. I'm unhappy in my marriage. And they don't do anything about it. And I know that not all these things are like easy to fix, and there aren't easy fixes, but at least do something about it. If you don't like the way that you look, and you want to lose weight, like, do that. Go after that. But I mean, there's no point in talking about something or complaining about something and then not changing it. So, I mean, whenever I tell somebody I'm going to do something, I do it. And I really always struggle to fathom the people who don't. Like, I just don't get it. So I think the biggest mistake that people make in their careers and their lives is like, if you are bothered or want something enough that you are talking about it on a regular basis, you need to do something about
it. And what about for those people who find themselves at a little bit of a crossroads? Because sometimes it's a, do I stay the course, or do I take that risk? What would your advice be to someone to help navigate through that quite hard process of carry on or actually take a left turn?
I think you should just go for it. You're always going to regret the risks you don't take. Always. I mean, most risks in life are not irreversible either. It's not like you're going to die most of the time, especially not like in marketing. You're not going to die. Nobody else is going to die. Like, if you decide to go down a certain path and then you decide that you don't like it, like, you can course correct. So I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian until I went to university and discovered, actually, I'm not very good at math or science, and I really don't enjoy them. So, I then needed to find a different path. But, that's not an end of the world situation. And, changing your job, leaving your corporate life to go start an agency, for example, if you decided that you didn't like running an agency, you can go back to corporate life. You can go back and get a new job in corporate. So, I mean, a lot of the time, the risks that we're talking about are not things that are irreversible. So if we go back to those balls that we're all juggling, don't mess with the glass balls. Like, don't, jeopardize your health for something. Don't expose yourself to nuclear waste and get cancer, obviously. But most of the time, the risks that we're talking about are not going to kill you. They're maybe going to take you in a different life direction, but you can always put it back on a different direction if you don't like it. So, I mean, if you are thinking about this change every other day or once a week, enough that it's in your mind that you're consistently thinking about it, then you need to do something about it. You need to explore it in some way. Maybe start by like dipping your toe in, have a few conversations with people who are currently doing that, see what their life is like, do some research, do some analysis, think about whether or not this is really going to be right for you, but don't just sit there.
What is the worst that can happen?
Try not to die. And as long as you're alive, there's nothing that can't be fixed.
But yeah, and what an absolute perfect line for us to finish our conversation.
Try not to die. My number one piece of life advice. Stay alive. All will be well.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to you for listening. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe for future episodes, leave a review, or share with your friends and colleagues. See you next time.